Hello friends, I won't take much of your time. I just ask you to subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
My brother said it loud enough that the entire table heard it, even the kids. He didn't even bother whispering. Christmas isn't for people like you. And the worst part? My parents didn't say a word. My mother just reached for her wine like she'd been waiting for someone to finally say it. My dad gave a slow, disappointed nod, like it was some hard truth he'd carried on his shoulders for decades. It was the kind of sentence you can't unhear. It doesn't matter how tough you think you are, or how long you've been swallowing your pride for the sake of keeping peace. I sat there blinking at the string lights around the mantel, trying to pretend I'd misheard. But I hadn't. He said it, and they agreed. I don't know what I expected this Christmas. Maybe some half-hearted thank yous, a plastic smile from my mother, or another one of my dad's grunts of acknowledgement. But instead, I got disowned in the middle of a dinner I paid for. Prime rib, mashed sweet potatoes, 3 different pies, a mountain of presents under the tree that I'd wrapped alone in my apartment, while everyone else was out at the Christmas Eve church pageant I hadn't even been invited to. And it wasn't like I just showed up with a bottle of wine and attitude. I'd been holding this family together for years. I'd paid the mortgage on my parents' house for almost a decade. Ever since Dad's second heart episode left him semi-retired and the bills started piling up. I'd helped cover my brother Toby's credit card debt when he got laid off 5 years ago, which actually meant he stopped showing up and never told anyone. I bought his kids new clothes every fall, made sure their birthdays were remembered, even paid for that ridiculous bounce house rental last summer when Jenna, his wife, called me crying because Toby had forgotten to plan anything. And still, somehow, I was the outsider. It all started small that day. Christmas morning had gone fine, or so I thought. I showed up early with pastries from the bakery near my place, helped my mom get the ham in the oven, and even wore the itchy red sweater she gave me last year. Toby and his family arrived around noon, already acting like I was invisible. Jenna gave me a weak smile. The kids barely looked up from their iPads, and Toby was on his phone for most of the afternoon. I thought maybe I was being sensitive, reading too much into things, maybe tired from the drive. Dinner was tense. My mom criticized the cranberry sauce, which I had made the same exact way for the past 6 years. My dad made a joke about career women not knowing how to keep a house warm. Toby laughed harder than he should have, but I kept smiling. I was used to it. These little jabs had become the soundtrack of every family gathering. I knew how to take it, or at least I thought I did. Then we started talking about next year's plans. My mom mentioned maybe visiting Toby's family out in Arizona, which was news to me. Well, we'll see, Toby said, sipping from his wine glass. Not sure if Melanie will be funding our holidays by then. The table laughed. Except me. I didn't laugh. I stared at my plate and felt heat crawl up the back of my neck. Then Toby leaned back in his chair and said it, just loud enough, just clear enough to land like a punch. Christmas isn't for people like you. At first I thought he meant it as a joke, like some tasteless jab. But when I looked up, I saw my mom already frowning like she agreed. It's just, she said, trailing off and looking at my dad for backup. You live a very different life. My dad finally put down his fork, looked me dead in the eye, and said, You chose your path. You chose to be alone. That's fine. But you can't expect to be part of everything when you're not really part of us anymore. That was it. That was the moment. I stood up quietly, pushing my chair back without a word. No dramatic scene, no screaming or crying. I just looked at each of them, one by one, trying to burn the moment into my memory. My brother looked smug, my mom uncomfortable, my dad tired, and Jenna refused to meet my eyes. I walked out into the cold, leaving the half-eaten dinner behind. I didn't say goodbye. I got in my car, turned the ignition, and just sat there in the driveway for a while, watching the frost creep across the windshield. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my banking app, one of those automated reminders that the mortgage auto payment would go through tomorrow. I stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen. Then I smiled. For the first time that night, I really smiled. I opened the app and paused the transaction. Then I opened the utilities folder. Electric, gas, water, all linked to my account. I turned everything off for billing reevaluation. I opened another folder, Toby's bills, the credit card he never paid off, the car lease I stupidly co-signed for, the data plan for the kids' tablets. All in my name, all getting shut down. When I finally pulled out of the driveway, I could see them through the big bay window, still sitting at the table, still talking like they'd won something. They had no idea, not yet, but they would. There's a kind of rage that doesn't roar, it simmers. It doesn't burst into flames or shatter dishes. It just sharpens. It turns into a scalpel, precise, quiet, deadly. That's what I felt driving away from that house on Christmas night, watching the string lights in my rearview mirror fade into the dark like dying stars. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, but I started making a list in my head, every single thing I was paying for, everything I had propped up in their lives without thanks, without recognition, and especially without any real love behind it. They hadn't just humiliated me. They disrespected the years I spent keeping them above water, and they did it so casually, like they never even considered the damage it might do. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into every financial portal I had ever touched on their behalf. First stop was my parents' mortgage company. I had been paying it directly for nearly 8 years. Ever since my father's health scare meant my mother had to take on all the household responsibilities and then promptly decided she was too tired to manage the bills. I had stepped in back then because it felt like the right thing to do. I had been grateful I could help. It made me feel like I belonged, like I was needed, but now I saw it for what it was: indentured servitude hidden under the veil of family duty. The house was in their names, but the payments came out of my account automatically every month. I had paid over $100,000 into a home I didn't live in and was no longer welcome in. So I made the call. I wasn't nasty, I wasn't petty, I just informed the lender that the card on file would no longer be active, and that I would no longer be responsible for any future payments. The woman on the other end tried to upsell me on refinancing options. I declined with a pleasant "no thank you" and hung up. Then came the utilities. Gas, electric, water, trash, every single bill tied to that household was under my online account. That had started because my parents didn't trust digital stuff, so they asked me to set it all up and handle the passwords. Over the years, it became a silent agreement. I'd pay, and they'd never say thank you. Not once. That night, I paused every payment plan, revoked every auto draft, and changed every password. They'd have to make the calls themselves now. I imagined my mom trying to navigate an automated phone tree, swearing at the voice prompts, and I let myself laugh. But that wasn't all. Not by a long shot. My brother's expenses were next. His credit card was technically mine. Well, it was a secondary card on my account, set up during what he called a rough patch, right after his layoff. I'd never seen a single payment from him, but the charges kept coming. Fancy dinners, video game purchases, and once even a hotel stay in Vegas. I pretended not to notice. The last straw had been earlier that month when I saw a charge for season tickets to some minor league baseball team he probably couldn't name a single player from. I canceled the card right then, called the issuer, reported it compromised, and made sure a new card was issued directly to me. Let him explain to Jenna why his tab suddenly dried up. The car lease came next. He'd convinced me 2 years ago to co-sign because he couldn't get approved on his own, thanks to his credit being in the toilet for a while. What he failed to mention was that he'd already defaulted on 2 other car loans, and I was the last sucker left in the family tree. I called the dealership and informed them I would not be renewing or continuing the co-signer agreement when it came up in 3 months. In the meantime, I asked for a restriction to be placed on the account. No new charges, no transfers, no changes without my direct approval. That alone felt like slicing through a decade of manipulation with a pair of golden scissors. I even remembered the family Netflix, which, naturally, I had been paying for. Same for Disney Plus, Hulu, and some niche sports streaming service Toby had once accidentally subscribed to and never canceled. It was all tied to my card. So one by one, I logged in and deactivated every profile but my own. No warning, no text, no explanation, just silence. By the time the sun came up, I had freed myself from every financial shackle I didn't even realize I'd been dragging around. And still, I hadn't heard a single word from them. No missed calls, no texts. It was like they hadn't even noticed yet. But I knew they would, soon. 3 days passed. I went back to work, back to normal, or at least I tried. But I could feel something brewing, like the quiet before a tornado. On the 4th morning, I got the first call. It wasn't from my mother, or Toby, or even my dad. It was from Jenna. She didn't sound angry. She didn't even sound panicked. She sounded hollow, like someone who had already given up before the conversation even started. "Mel, hey," she said. "I'm sorry to bother you, but do you have a few minutes? Can I come by? Alone?" I paused. I didn't owe her anything. But curiosity got the better of me. I told her yes. When she arrived that evening, she looked like she hadn't slept. Her hair was up in a messy knot, and her eyes were red-rimmed. She brought no pleasantries, no excuses, no small talk. She sat on my couch, held her hands tightly in her lap, and said, "I think it's time you knew the truth about Toby, and maybe about your parents too." My stomach dropped. I didn't say anything. I just stared at her and waited. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small USB drive. She placed it on my coffee table like it was some kind of bomb. "You're going to want to see what's on this," she said, barely above a whisper. "But I have to warn you, once you do, things won't go back to the way they were. Not ever." I looked at that little drive sitting there between us, and for the first time in years, I felt something unexpected stir inside me. Fear. Not of what I'd find, but of how deep this betrayal might really go. I thought cutting them off would be the end of it. I was wrong. It was only the beginning. The flash drive sat on my coffee table like it was made of lead. Jenna didn't offer anything more, and I didn't ask, at least not right away. There was a moment heavy with tension where we just sat in silence. She looked small on my couch, hunched in her oversized cardigan, like someone who had spent too long trying to be invisible in her own life. Her hands fidgeted, fingers twisted around the sleeves, and when I finally spoke, I kept my voice low. "I don't want to guess," I said. "Just tell me what I'm walking into." She looked up then, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw her face without its usual cautious neutrality. Her eyes were raw, like she'd been crying off and on for days. When she spoke, her voice didn't shake, but it was the kind of calm you only find when you've already accepted that everything's about to burn down around you. "Toby lied to you about almost everything," she said. "Not just the job, not just the money. He lied about why he needed help. He lied about where the money was going, and I lied too, by staying quiet." There was a part of me that wanted to interrupt, to start asking questions. What did he do? How long? Why didn't you say something sooner? But I didn't. I let her speak, and she did. "He hasn't had a real job since that warehouse won 5 years ago," she said, staring into the distance like she was watching a memory she couldn't stand. "He told you he got laid off, right? That the company folded? They didn't. He got fired. He was caught stealing inventory and blaming it on coworkers. They didn't press charges because they didn't want the headache, but they gave him the option to resign quietly. He came home that day with a severance check and a story, and I believed him. Or maybe I just wanted to." I leaned forward a little, my hands gripping the edge of the couch. She went on before I could ask anything. "He's been gambling for years, casinos, online poker, fantasy sports. It doesn't matter what it is as long as he thinks he can win. But he never does. Every time he lost, he'd come up with some new excuse. He said he was trying to flip the money you gave us to pay off debts faster, that if I just let him try one more time, it'd all be okay. And when I threatened to leave, he said he'd tell your parents it was all your fault." At that, I felt something crawl up my spine. My fault? What does that even mean? Jenna looked at me, and for a second I thought she might break. But she didn't. He told them you offered to pay for everything, that you insisted, that you wanted to take control of the family finances because you didn't think they could handle it. He told them you were trying to humiliate them, said you'd always thought you were better than us because you had no kids and a fancy job. I laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that comes from something being funny. It was the kind that leaks out when your body doesn't know what else to do with betrayal. It was hollow. My parents believe that? I asked, but I already knew the answer. He said he had proof. He printed out your emails, the ones where you sent over spreadsheets, budgets, reminders to pay things on time. He twisted your words, made it sound like you were lecturing us all, like you were dangling money over our heads just to feel powerful. I stood up. I couldn't sit anymore. I walked to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, and downed it in 3 gulps. I felt like I had swallowed a fist. I turned back to her, my voice low. "And you?" "What did you do?" Jenna flinched. She didn't get defensive. She didn't argue. She just looked tired. "I stayed quiet," she said. "I told myself it was for the kids, that they needed a roof, clothes, school, and you were always there, so I let it keep happening. I'm sorry, Mel. I should have said something sooner." The anger I expected didn't rise. Instead, I felt this numbness creeping into my chest. I should have seen it. I'd ignored the signs, made excuses for all of them. I'd bent over backward, trying to belong to a family that had quietly pushed me out the moment I stopped being convenient. I walked over, picked up the flash drive, and looked at it like it might bite. "What's on here?" I asked. Jenna didn't meet my eyes when she answered. "Old videos, things I found on a backup drive. Stuff your mom never meant for you to see. Conversations they had when they thought the camera wasn't rolling, some from when Toby was a teenager, some from when you left for college." I felt my stomach churn, but I didn't say anything. I walked over to my laptop, plugged it in, and opened the folder. It was labeled with a single word: omissions. There were a dozen video files. I clicked on one at random, a grainy clip from what looked like the late 90s. My mom was sitting at the kitchen table, her voice hushed, but the microphone picked it up clear as day. "I just don't think she needs to know. She's different, always has been. Toby, though, he needs structure. He needs help. He could really mess up his life if we're not careful." My dad replied, "We've already made the choice. She'll be fine. She always is. But we can't risk losing him. Not again." I paused the video, heart thudding in my chest. My mom's face hadn't changed in 25 years. Same stiff mouth, same tired eyes, but the words, they were sharp, cold, like they were talking about an investment, not a daughter. I turned to Jenna, who was watching me like she wanted to run out the door and never come back. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her what the hell they were talking about. What choice? What risk? But instead, I sat down, stared at the drive, and let the silence sit heavy between us. "There's more," she said finally. "A lot more." I nodded. Not ready to watch the rest. Not yet, but I knew I would. I had to. "You're leaving him?" I asked. She nodded. "As soon as I find a place." I stood up again, needing to move. "Take the kids and get out as fast as you can. Whatever comes next, you don't want to be there for it." She didn't argue. She just grabbed her bag, thanked me, and walked out the door. When she left, I locked the door, closed all the blinds, and sat in the dark with that flash drive burning a hole in my laptop. Whatever I thought this was, revenge, justice, closure, it was turning into something else entirely. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to know what came next. It was just after 2 in the morning when I hit play on the second video. The apartment was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak from the building settling into the night. I hadn't turned on any lights. Something about watching in the dark made it feel more like a confession than just a recording. The grainy footage on my screen showed my childhood living room, the dated furniture and wallpaper pulling me backward in time like a hook behind the ribs. My parents sat on the couch, young enough to look like strangers, and yet everything about their posture was familiar. My mother's arms were folded, her eyes tired but alert, My father leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, nodding slowly like he already regretted whatever they were about to say. I just think, my mother began, her voice sharp and hushed like she didn't want to wake anyone. If we let her go, that'll be the last of it. She'll never come back. She got into Columbia, Carol, my dad said, rubbing his temple like the name alone gave him a headache. That's not something you just talk her out of. She doesn't need to be in New York, my mom snapped. She doesn't need that city, those people, those ideas. She's not that kind of girl, not like Toby. I paused the video and sat back, breath catching in my throat. Columbia. I had applied on a whim, mostly because one of my professors had encouraged me to aim higher. I remembered getting the acceptance letter like it was yesterday. I had cried in my dorm room, called my mom, and told her I'd been offered a scholarship. Not a full ride, but enough that it felt real. And I remembered her hesitation, the way she'd said, "That's far away," and nothing else. In the end, I turned it down. I told everyone it was too expensive, that I didn't feel ready, that staying in state was smarter. But the truth was I'd folded under the pressure. They never really said no, they just made it impossible to say yes. I hit play again. "She's strong," my dad said after a long silence. "She'll land on her feet no matter where she goes." "That's exactly why we can afford to hold her back," my mom replied, eyes flashing. "Toby needs this more. He needs a safety net. She doesn't. You know how easily he slips. He can't even keep a part-time job without making a mess of things." "She's going to hate us," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "She'll never know," my mother answered. I stopped the video. I didn't move for a long time. Everything from that year made a cruel kind of sense now. The encouragement that came with strings, the hesitation in their voices, the way my dad had offered to help figure out the financial aid package, and then came back telling me it just wasn't feasible. The way they cheered when I enrolled in state like it was a victory, not a compromise. I had thought I'd made that choice. I had thought I was in control of my own life. But they had been pulling the strings, even then. I clicked through more of the videos. A few were mundane, family birthday parties, one Christmas morning where Toby threw a tantrum because I'd been given a bigger present. But buried within were other moments. Conversations in hushed tones when they thought no one was recording. Whispers of, "Don't let her see the mail and tell her the check didn't come through." One in particular sent a chill through my bones. My mother was speaking to someone off camera, maybe a friend, maybe a relative. "She's not like the rest of us," she said plainly, slicing a pear with surgical precision at the kitchen counter. "She doesn't feel things the same way. It's like she's made of something colder, smarter, yes, but not warm." The woman off camera responded with a soft laugh. "You think she knows?" "Oh, she suspects, but she'll never say it out loud. That's the difference. Toby would scream about it. She'll carry it like it's her fault." And then the screen went dark. I didn't know how long I sat there staring at the monitor after the video ended. I don't even think I blinked. My pulse thundered in my ears, but the rest of me felt frozen, like I'd slipped beneath the surface of something and couldn't find the air. At first I thought she was talking about my independence, my personality, but then I remembered the folder name, Omissions. I remembered the envelope I'd found last year in their filing cabinet when they asked me to help them organize their taxes. A thick manila envelope with a worn label that simply said, "Melanie, Medical." I had flipped through it without much interest at the time, only pausing when I saw something odd. A document from before my birth. Some kind of legal-looking form I couldn't make sense of. I'd asked about it, and my mother had snatched it from my hands, claiming it was from a cousin and didn't concern me. I had believed her. Now I wasn't so sure. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even pretend to try. Instead, I stayed up rereading emails, thinking about timelines, about college acceptances, and job interviews I never made it to, about how many almosts I'd had in my life, almost moved, almost accepted, almost trusted, and how many of those had slipped away because someone behind the curtain was snipping the threads. By morning, I was done waiting. I called my lawyer. We'd talked already about the identity theft and the unpaid credit cards Toby had opened in my name. But now I asked her to dig deeper. I wanted everything, every record, every legal transaction, every piece of documentation that had my name on it, and especially anything tied to my birth. I didn't explain why. I didn't need to. Later that day, I drove to my parents' house. I didn't knock. My dad opened the door, surprised but not alarmed. My mother was in the kitchen, as usual, pouring tea like we were about to sit down for some warm little talk. I stood in the middle of the living room and asked one question. "What did you do?" My mother didn't flinch. She didn't ask what I meant. She just put the cup down on the saucer a little too carefully and said, "I suppose you saw the videos." I nodded. "We did what we thought was right," she said. "You thought lying to me about my life was right?" "You were always so determined," she said with a strange sort of pride. "We had to redirect you, or you would have left and never looked back." "You don't get to decide who I become," I said, voice shaking now. "You never did." "We saved your brother's life," she said, as if that justified everything. "No," I said, stepping back. "You sacrificed mine to do it." I walked out. Neither of them followed. When I got home, there was an envelope waiting in my mailbox, no return address. Inside was a single photo, me as a toddler, standing in front of a courthouse, a woman's hand resting lightly on my shoulder, her face cropped out. On the back, in unfamiliar handwriting, was one sentence. "You were never supposed to find out." There's a kind of stillness that comes after the worst of the storm, but it's not peace. It's something much quieter and heavier, the kind of stillness that feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for the next tremor, the next revelation, the next reminder that things are never going to be the way they were before. That's what it felt like sitting alone in my apartment after everything. After the videos, after Jenna's confession, after the envelope with the photo that changed more than it should have. I hadn't spoken to my parents since the day I walked out of their house, hadn't received so much as a text from my brother, and for once the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt earned, like the consequence of finally doing something that was right, even if it came too late to save what little connection we had left. It had been 3 weeks since Christmas, and in that time, every domino I'd set in motion began to fall in ways I hadn't entirely expected. When I stopped paying the mortgage, the bank acted fast. The grace period ended before anyone could blink, and the first foreclosure notice was delivered within 10 days. My mother tried to call me once. I let it ring, then I blocked her number. I figured if they needed help navigating eviction proceedings, they could use all that wisdom they claimed to have gathered raising such a difficult daughter. I had carried their weight for long enough, and I wasn't about to start giving free lessons on how to float without a life preserver, especially when they had spent the last 20 years pretending they didn't even need one. The utilities were shut off next. I knew the pattern. I had paid those bills long enough to know exactly when each service would cut them loose. The gas was the first to go, followed closely by the electricity. By the time the water was shut off, they were using bottled jugs from the grocery store. A neighbor emailed me, one I barely remembered from childhood, just to let me know she'd seen my father sitting in his car in the driveway with the engine running, trying to stay warm. I didn't respond. As for Toby, it took exactly 12 days for the credit card company to freeze his account and send him into a spiral. He started calling me from unknown numbers, texting me with messages that flipped between rage and desperation. 1 minute accusing me of ruining his life, the next begging me to help his kids. I didn't reply to any of them. When Jenna left him and moved into her sister's basement with the boys, Toby finally cracked. He showed up at my apartment door on a Wednesday night, pounding so hard it shook the hinges. I watched him through the peephole. He looked thinner, his eyes wild, his hair unwashed and curling around his ears like a man who had lost more than just money. He looked like someone who had finally realized that the safety net he had always taken for granted had been yanked out from under him. I didn't open the door. I called the police. When they arrived, he was sitting on the floor in the hallway, crying into his hands. They asked if I wanted to press charges. I didn't, not that night. I thought it would feel good. I thought the revenge, the justice, the pure poetic unraveling of everything they had taken from me would bring some kind of satisfaction, some kind of relief. And maybe for a minute it did. Maybe it felt powerful to hold the knife they had once pressed against my neck and finally cut myself free from them all. But after the dust settled, after the last unpaid bill was returned to sender, and the final trace of their dependency had been erased from my accounts, what I was left with wasn't triumph. It was a kind of hollow, echoing quiet that no amount of vengeance could fill. That's when I decided to leave. I sold the condo I'd spent 7 years fixing up and bought a small home in upstate New York. Nothing fancy, just something mine. I picked a town no one in my family had ever mentioned, somewhere off the highway, nestled between aging trees and winding 2-lane roads. The air was cleaner there, and the silence felt less suffocating. I started volunteering at a women's shelter twice a week, helping other women get out of financial traps that looked an awful lot like mine. I thought maybe that was the one good thing I could pull from the wreckage, a chance to help someone else find the escape hatch I had spent so long searching for. The house was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet I chose. I didn't decorate for Valentine's Day. I didn't pretend to be someone I wasn't. I spent my mornings with strong coffee and the kind of books I used to tell myself I didn't have time to read. I even started writing, nothing fancy, just small essays about financial abuse, about the hidden contracts of family loyalty, about what happens when love turns into leverage. I had begun to forget about the flash drive, about the folder labeled omissions, about the envelope with the photo and the cryptic message, until the second package arrived. It came in early February, no name, no return address, just a plain manila envelope shoved into my mailbox like an afterthought. Inside was another flash drive and a stack of papers that looked too old to be in such good condition. There was no letter, no explanation, just the unmistakable scent of something heavy. I brought it inside, turned on the lamp by my desk, and opened the folder slowly. The first page was a court document, an adoption petition dated 2 years before my birth certificate. It listed a woman's name I didn't recognize. There were signatures, there were approvals, there were sealed notations. At the bottom was my name, my real name. I didn't recognize it. I plugged in the flash drive with shaking hands, my mind a mess of questions I couldn't quite form into words. The folder that opened was labeled Truth, and inside were 4 files. The first was a video, fuzzy, unedited footage of my parents speaking to a social worker, thanking her for helping them fix things after a botched guardianship battle. The second was a series of scanned letters, written by a woman named Marianne, who claimed she had never wanted to give me up, who said she had been coerced, who said she watched from afar as my parents raised me like some prized possession but never told me who I really was. I didn't open the last 2 files. Not yet. I closed the folder, powered off the laptop, and walked to the window. Snow had started to fall, slow and soft, like the world was trying to hush me before I screamed. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I don't know if I'll ever reach out to this Marianne woman, if she's even still alive. I don't know what I'll say to my parents, if anything at all. I don't know who I am, not completely, and maybe I never did, but I do know this. I'm not who they made me to be. And this year, for the first time in my adult life, I celebrated Christmas alone. Not because I wasn't invited, not because I wasn't needed, but because I chose to. And somehow, that felt more like belonging than anything they ever offered me.